She had 47 bodyguards, 3 armored vehicles, and a net worth that made governments nervous. None of it mattered when the tunnel went dark. Olivia Bennett, CEO, billionaire, untouchable, was gone in under 90 seconds. The men trained to protect her never saw it coming, but one man did. He wasn't a bodyguard. He wasn't armed. He was her driver for the evening, a quiet 37-year-old with grease under his fingernails and a daughter waiting at home. And he was already moving. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now and drop your city in the comments. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Like the video, stay with me until the end, and let's find out what one ordinary man is willing to do when the world refuses to see him coming. The car smelled like pine air freshener and old leather, and Nathan Brooks had already decided he didn't like the route. He sat behind the wheel of the black Cadillac Escalade, third vehicle in a 5-car convoy, watching the side mirrors with the quiet, unhurried attention of someone who had learned long ago that the thing that killed you was almost never the thing you were looking at directly. It was always something small, something that didn't belong. A delivery truck parked with its nose facing the wrong direction. A utility van with clean tires on a rainy night. A security camera mounted at an angle that served no useful purpose unless someone had repositioned it. He'd noticed 3 such things in the last 11 minutes. He hadn't said anything yet. He was the temporary driver. He didn't say things. In the back seat, Olivia Bennett was on her phone, voice low and measured, walking someone through a clause in an acquisition agreement with the kind of focused precision that made Nathan think she probably hadn't eaten dinner. She had the manner of someone accustomed to being the most prepared person in any room, not arrogant about it, just factual. Her schedule had been rearranged twice in the last hour. Her assistant had texted him the updated destination 40 minutes ago, private terminal at the edge of the city, a meeting that had been moved from tomorrow morning to tonight, apparently at the request of the other party. That detail had been bothering him since he read it. "I understand the concern," Olivia was saying into the phone, "but the valuation holds. If Mercer wants to renegotiate the IP clauses at 11 o'clock at night, they can put it in writing by 6 a.m., or the deal goes back to the original timeline." She didn't sound rattled. She sounded like someone who had been tested before and found it more annoying than frightening. Nathan checked the mirror again. The utility van 3 blocks back had matched their last 2 turns. He picked up his radio. The lead vehicle's security coordinator was a man named Garrett, ex-law enforcement, competent, experienced, and, in Nathan's brief assessment, slightly too comfortable. The kind of professional who had stopped being truly alert somewhere around the 3rd uneventful year of a safe assignment. "Brooks," Garrett's voice came through. "We're about 8 minutes out, smooth so far." "Copy," Nathan said. Then, carefully, "Garrett, we've got a utility van that's been with us since Halstead. White, partial plate November Foxtrot, maintaining distance but matching our turns." A pause. "Could be a coincidence. City traffic." "Could be," Nathan said. He didn't believe it was. There was a short silence on the channel, the kind that meant Garrett was deciding whether to take it seriously or let it go. Nathan had known men like Garrett his entire adult life. Good men. Men who had learned that most alerts turned out to be nothing, and had slowly, invisibly shifted their default assumption from danger to safety. It was a natural evolution in a low-threat environment. It was also how you got people killed. "I'll flag it to the team," Garrett said finally. "Stay en route." Nathan stayed en route. In the back seat, Olivia ended her call. He watched her in the mirror, not in the way that made people uncomfortable, just a glance, the way a professional driver checks on a passenger. She was looking out the window at the city lights, one hand resting loosely in her lap, the other pressing 2 fingers briefly to her temple. She looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. It was the kind of tired that accumulated over months. "Mr. Brooks," she said, without turning from the window. "Ma'am." "How long have you been with the company?" She meant the security contractor her firm used. Nathan had been loaned to them for the evening when her usual driver called in sick. He'd been working for the contractor for 8 months, mostly routine corporate transport. It paid decently, and the hours, while irregular, were manageable around school drop-off. 8 months, he said. Tonight's the first time I've driven for you directly. I know, she said. I checked. She finally looked at his reflection in the mirror. She had the kind of direct eye contact that wasn't aggressive, just honest. Your file is mostly blank. Background check cleared, references checked out, but your employment history before the last 2 years is almost entirely redacted. Yes, ma'am. That's unusual. I imagine it is. She studied him for another moment. Were you military? The question was conversational, not suspicious. Nathan had the distinct impression she asked questions the way she ran her company, not to fill silence, but because she actually wanted the answer. Yes, he said. Which branch? Navy. She nodded slowly, as if filing that away. My company does a lot of work with defense contractors. I've met a fair number of veterans. There's something about the way they pay attention. She paused. You've been watching the mirrors since we left the building. It's my job to watch the mirrors. The other drivers don't do it the same way. Nathan didn't respond to that. The convoy was slowing slightly, entering the long 2-lane underpass that cut beneath the rail yard and came out on the industrial side of the port district. He knew the tunnel. He'd driven it twice before on different routes. It was about 400 yards long, lit by overhead fluorescents, with no turnoffs and no exits until the far end. His hands tightened slightly on the wheel. The utility van was still behind them. He'd confirmed it twice in the last 6 minutes, and the lead vehicle, Garrett's SUV, had just slowed 10 yards ahead in a way that didn't match traffic. Garrett? Nathan said into the radio, voice flat. Why are we slowing? Static. Then, there's some kind of debris in the left lane. Wait. The fluorescents in the tunnel went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just gone, all of them. The entire 400-yard stretch of underground road dropping into complete darkness in the space of a half second. The only light was the convoy's own headlights, casting pale cones forward into the black. Nathan hit his earpiece. Garrett, report. Nothing. He was already making the calculation. The tunnel had approximately 260 yards of usable driving space behind the lead vehicle before the rear entrance. The convoy had 5 vehicles. If the lead stopped, not gradually. Emergency braking, sudden, the kind that meant either collision or obstacle. The second vehicle slammed on its brakes. Nathan had already anticipated it and downshifted, bleeding speed without losing control, keeping his own vehicle from rear-ending the one ahead. Miss Bennett, he said, voice steady, get down on the floor, now. What's floor, now? He said it the way men said things when there was no time to explain, and something in the tone, something that had nothing to do with politeness or authority and everything to do with certainty, made her move. She dropped. The rear entrance of the tunnel filled with light. 2 vehicles, high beams, blocking the exit. Nathan checked the forward camera. Something large, a truck or a construction barrier, had been rolled across the forward exit. The convoy was boxed, clean, practiced. Nobody had improvised this. Radio traffic erupted. Garrett's voice finally. All units hold position. We have a blockade. Then a sharp pop of sound that Nathan recognized before his mind fully processed it, and then Garrett's channel went silent. Doors opened on the vehicles ahead, boots on asphalt. Nathan counted movement. 6 figures from the front, at least 4 from the rear, working fast and in coordinated silence. The kind of silence that meant they'd rehearsed this. His phone had no signal. Tunnels did that. They'd known that too. He sat very still for approximately 2 seconds, doing the math that he'd spent 15 years learning how to do quickly and without panic. Threat count, exit options, his own resources, the likely objective. The vehicles, the speed, the precision. These weren't opportunists. This wasn't a robbery. They were here for the person on the floor behind him. Ms. Bennett, he said quietly, stay down and stay quiet. Whatever you hear, do not move unless I tell you to. Who are these people? Her voice was controlled, scared but controlled. He added that to his assessment of her. I don't know yet, he said. But they're organized. They cut the power and the comms, and they stopped your whole convoy in under a minute. This was planned. Planned by whom? That's the question. A beam of light swept the windshield. Figures approaching his vehicle. Nathan kept his hands visible on the wheel, made himself appear exactly what they believed him to be. A driver. Nobody. A body behind a wheel. Hired labor, not a threat. The door was wrenched open. A man with a tactical flashlight pointed it into Nathan's face. Mid-30s, fit, moving like someone with training. Not a criminal. Former military or law enforcement, the way he planted his feet gave it away. Nathan memorized the face in the half-second he had. "Out of the vehicle," the man said. Nathan got out slowly, hands up. He didn't resist. He didn't speak. He let them look at him. The plain dark uniform, the ordinary build, the face that revealed nothing. And he watched them decide he was exactly what his file said he was. A driver, temporary, unimportant. They pulled Olivia from the back seat. She resisted. Not wildly, but with deliberate friction, the kind of resistance designed to observe rather than escape, buying herself information about how they moved and where they were positioned. He noticed that. Most people panicked. She was thinking. "Don't," he said to her, and the word carried a weight that made the man holding her arm glance at Nathan. "You have something to say, driver?" the man asked. Nathan looked at him, not with anger, not with fear, just looked, in the way that men who have spent years in very quiet, very dangerous rooms sometimes look at other men. A kind of flat appraisal that communicated nothing except that the look itself was a choice. "No," Nathan said. They shoved him against the tunnel wall. Olivia was moved forward, toward the lead vehicles. He heard her say something sharp in protest, heard a door close, heard engines turning over. The rear blockade vehicles were already moving. He stood against the tunnel wall with 4 men watching him, and he did not move. He counted to 30 after the sound of the convoy vehicles faded. 2 of the 4 men left. The remaining 2 were positioned between him and the rear exit, unhurried, assuming the job was done. They hadn't taken his phone. It had no signal, but that was temporary. They hadn't searched him thoroughly because they'd already made their most dangerous mistake. They had decided what he was, and they had been wrong. He waited in the dark tunnel with the particular stillness of a man who is not waiting out of helplessness, but out of patience. And he began to count the things he knew. They had at minimum 8 people and 4 vehicles. They'd had inside access to the convoy route, the tunnel's electrical systems, and the communications frequencies Garrett's team used. Someone had told them the meeting had been rescheduled to tonight. Someone had given them the exact departure time. Someone inside Olivia Bennett's organization had handed her to these people. The 2 guards were relaxed. They believed the operation was over. Nathan studied the nearest one. The angle of his shoulders, the way he held his sidearm, whether he favored his right or his left. He studied the distance. He studied the darkness. He thought about his daughter, Maya, 8 years old, asleep right now, in the house on Kellner Street with his neighbor, Mrs. Pacheco, checking in at 10. He thought about the promise he'd made himself when he left the teams. No more operations. No more rooms like this. A quiet life, a school schedule, breakfast in the morning. He thought about Olivia Bennett saying that there was something about the way veterans paid attention, and he thought about the convoy being boxed in under 60 seconds by people who had access to information they should not have had. He had 2 guards, no weapon, no signal, and a head start that was shrinking by the minute. He thought about Maya. Then he stopped thinking and started working. The guard on the left never heard him move. The guard on the left never heard him move. And the one on the right only had about half a second to understand what was happening before Nathan had already finished it. He didn't hurt them more than necessary. That had always been one of the distinctions between the work he'd done and the work of men who enjoyed it. He used exactly what the situation required and nothing extra. 2 precise pressure points, 2 controlled takedowns, the kind of thing that felt almost mechanical when you'd practiced it enough times that your body stopped asking your brain for permission. Both men were zip-tied with their own restraints and left breathing in the dark tunnel, and Nathan was moving before the second one's knees finished hitting the ground. He emerged from the tunnel's rear entrance into cold air and thin drizzle. The industrial side of the port district stretched in every direction. Warehouses, loading docks, the distant orange glow of sodium lights over the rail yard. The vehicles were gone. The tunnel behind him was silent. His phone picked up a single bar of signal. He stood in the rain for a moment and thought about calling 911. Considered it seriously the way he considered most things, not dismissing it, just testing it against what he knew. The police would respond. They would secure the tunnel. They would take his statement, photograph the guards, run plates that would come back clean because whoever organized this had the resources to use clean plates. And then they would begin the long procedural work of determining what had happened, who was involved, and where Olivia Bennett might be. That process would take hours they didn't have. He dialed a different number. It rang twice. Then a voice, rough with sleep but instantly alert in the way that certain people were always instantly alert, the way it never fully went away regardless of how many years passed. Brooks. Not a question. Marcus Webb had always answered the phone that way, like he was acknowledging a report. "I need eyes," Nathan said. "I'm working, and I have no signal infrastructure." A short silence. He heard Marcus sit up. "Working how?" "Kidnapping, organized team, minimum 8 personnel, 4 vehicles, inside access to convoy routing, and comm frequencies. They took a high-value target out of a tunnel in the Port District about 9 minutes ago." 9 minutes. Marcus exhaled slowly. "You call the police?" "I'm calling you first." Another silence, this one different. Marcus doing the same calculation Nathan had already done, and arriving at the same answer. Marcus Webb had spent 11 years running surveillance and intelligence support for the same SEAL teams Nathan had operated with. He'd left the service 2 years before Nathan, gone private, built a small security consulting operation that mostly did corporate threat assessment and the occasional thing that never appeared in any corporate report. He was also the only person Nathan trusted completely and without reservation. "Give me what you have," Marcus said. Nathan walked while he talked, moving east along the service road that ran parallel to the tunnel's southern exit, keeping to the shadows out of habit. He gave Marcus everything: the utility van, the partial plate, the timing, the way the lead vehicle had stopped, the tactical posture of the men he'd seen, the fact that the meeting rescheduling had come less than 2 hours before departure. He described the man who'd opened his door, the foot placement, the way he held his weapon, the quality of his gear. "That's not street muscle," Marcus said. "No, it's not. Former military or private security, high end. That's my read." "Okay." He heard Marcus already moving, the sound of a chair, a keyboard. "I'm pulling traffic camera footage for the Port District. Give me the make on those blockade vehicles." "Heavy-duty pickup, black or dark gray, older model, and a flatbed. I only got a partial look at the rear one." Nathan paused at the edge of the service road, studying the intersection ahead. "Marcus, the inside access. They had the comm frequencies. That's not something you buy on the street." "No," Marcus said. "That comes from someone with legitimate access to Bennett Dynamics' security contractor. Or from someone inside the company itself." The rain had picked up slightly. Nathan pulled his collar up and kept moving. He was working on instinct now, the part of his brain that operated best when it was given a problem and no instructions. The part that had kept him alive in rooms and situations that didn't appear in any training manual. The kidnappers had moved east. He knew that from the sound of the engines before they'd faded. The Port District east of the tunnel was a maze of old industrial warehouses, most of them underutilized, several sitting empty pending rezoning applications that had been pending for years. He knew the area because he'd driven it 3 times on different assignments, and he had the habit, a leftover from the teams that he'd never fully shaken, of memorizing routes and landmarks the way other men memorized phone numbers. "I've got something," Marcus said. "Traffic cam at Dockside and Halstead. Your utility van, partial plate matches. It turned east on Meridian 18 minutes ago. Lost it after that. Camera coverage goes thin, but Meridian dead ends at the old Kessler Industrial Complex." Nathan knew the Kessler Complex. 4 buildings, mostly abandoned since the manufacturing operation had relocated, perimeter fence in poor repair, accessible from 3 directions, with loading bays large enough to fit half a dozen vehicles. It was exactly the kind of place you used if you needed to hold someone quietly while you waited for a wire transfer or extracted information or waited for a second phase of an operation to begin. Can you get me a layout? Already pulling it. County Records has the building permits. A pause. Nathan? Yeah. How many of these guys do you think there are, total? Conservatively, 12 to 15. The tunnel team alone was 8 confirmed. There will be a holding crew at the destination. And you're going in solo. It wasn't a challenge. It was Marcus doing what he'd always done, laying out the reality of a situation plainly, without drama, so the person making the decision had no excuse for not knowing what they were choosing. I'm going to look first, Nathan said. Nathan, I'm not going through the front door without knowing what's inside. That's not an answer. It's the answer I've got right now. Marcus let it go. I'm sending you the layout. And Nathan, call me before you go in, not after. Olivia regained full clarity somewhere around the 20-minute mark of the drive, which she calculated based on the number of turns, the sound of the road surface changing twice, and the fact that the vehicle had slowed and then stopped completely for what felt like a gate or a checkpoint before moving again. She'd been zip-tied and hooded, seated upright in what felt like the rear bench of a large SUV, flanked by 2 men who hadn't spoken to each other since they left the tunnel. She was frightened. She was also, underneath the fear, furious, which she recognized as a useful state. Fear contracted your options. Anger clarified them. She thought about what Nathan Brooks had said in the tunnel. They knew the route. He'd said it quietly, almost to himself, and she hadn't fully registered it until now. They knew the route, which meant the rescheduling, the late-night change that had sent her scrambling to reroute the convoy, had been anticipated. Either the rescheduling itself had been engineered, or someone had communicated the new route the moment it was set. She had given the updated destination to 4 people: her assistant Claire, her head of security Derek Sullivan, her chief of staff Marcus Trent, and the security contractor coordinating the convoy. 4 people. In 40 minutes. The vehicle stopped. She heard a rolling door, the sound of an industrial space, the particular hollow echo of a large building with high ceilings and concrete floors. The door rolled shut behind them. The temperature dropped by several degrees. They walked her for about 30 seconds, then sat her in a chair. Metal, cold, bolted to the floor. She felt the weight of it when she tried to shift her position. The hood came off. The warehouse was exactly what she'd expected. High ceilings, rusted support columns, industrial lighting that was harsh and incomplete, half the fixtures dark. There were cots along one wall, equipment cases, the kind used for electronics, stacked near a fold-out table where 2 men were working at laptops. A third man stood near the far wall with his arms crossed, watching her with the flat expression of someone who had done this before and found it neither interesting nor unpleasant. And then there was the man in the center of the space, standing in front of her with his hands in his jacket pockets, who was clearly in charge. He was around 50, lean in the manner of someone who had once been very fit and maintained most of it, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that were a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that often read as warm from a distance and weren't up close. "Ms. Bennett," he said, "I'm sorry about the circumstances. I want you to know that no one intends for you to be harmed." She looked at him. "Who are you?" "My name isn't relevant." "Okay." She kept her voice level. "What do you want?" "A transfer. $50 million into an account that will be provided to your CFO in the next 20 minutes. He paused. "He's already been contacted." "Paul won't authorize that without my direct confirmation." "He will," the man said simply, "once we send him a photograph." She understood the mechanics of it. She'd read enough threat assessment briefs to know how this kind of operation was typically structured. The ransom demand was the public-facing component, the thing designed to create urgency and compliance. It was also, she understood in a way that made her stomach tighten, frequently not the real objective. "You're not here for $50 million, she said. The man's expression didn't change, which was itself an answer. "The acquisition," she said. "You moved up the meeting, or someone did, to get me on the road tonight." He studied her for a moment. "You're very quick." "I get paid to be quick." She shifted in the chair, testing the zip tie's tension. Tight, but not cut-off tight. Someone had been trained to restrain without causing circulation damage. Professional habits were hard to break. The acquisition involves a data security architecture that took my company 6 years to develop. If someone walks out of my servers tonight with that IP, it doesn't just hurt Bennett Dynamics, it gets weaponized. You know that. Ms. Bennett, what I don't understand, she continued, is why you'd go to the trouble of kidnapping me when you clearly had enough inside access to pull the data without any of this. Unless the data alone isn't enough. Unless you need something else. She paused, thinking it through, and then she understood it. Authentication. The system requires biometric authentication to access the core architecture files, mine specifically. The man said nothing. Which means, she said, that $50 million is what you're telling my CFO. What you're actually here for is my thumbprint and my retinal scan. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled a chair from near the table, turned it backward, and sat down facing her with his arms resting across the back. Victor, he said, to no one in particular. Yeah. Another man came forward from the shadows. Younger, 30s, with the kind of compact physical ease that came from real training. He had a tablet in one hand. He set it on the table near her. She looked at it. The Bennett Dynamics Secure Portal login page. We'll do the ransom transfer first, the man in charge said. Then we'll move on to the rest. I want you to understand that the cooperation or non-cooperation is your choice, and that there are consequences either way. I'm not going to describe them because I think you're intelligent enough to understand them without elaboration. I appreciate that, she said, with a flatness that surprised even herself. The driver, Victor said suddenly, looking at the man in charge. We should have brought him. The older man waved a hand. He's a driver. He's in the tunnel waiting for the police. He looked at me wrong. Everybody looks at you wrong, Victor. Victor's jaw tightened. I'm telling you. He's a temp driver. His file has 8 months of civilian transport and nothing before that. He's nobody. Olivia kept her face perfectly still. She was thinking about Nathan Brooks in the mirror, the way he'd watched the road, the way he'd told her to get on the floor before she'd heard anything, before she'd seen anything, before she'd had any reason to believe something was wrong. The way he'd looked at Victor's man in the tunnel. Not scared, not aggressive, just that particular quality of absolute stillness that she now understood had nothing to do with passivity. He'd known. Before the lights went out, he'd already known. And he'd told her to stay quiet, not in the frantic way of someone trying to manage a crisis, in the measured way of someone who was already managing it and needed 30 seconds of cooperation to work. He's a nobody, the man in charge had said. She thought about the fact that both guards from the tunnel rear exit had still not radioed in. She thought about 8 months of civilian transport and nothing before that, and the particular way a person's employment file looked when it had been sanitized by an agency that didn't put its name on things. She kept her face still and let them believe she had no reason for hope. Dumb. Nathan had found a gap in the Kessler complex's perimeter fence at its northeast corner, where the chain link had been bent back from the bottom by years of trespassers and never repaired. He was through it in under 10 seconds, moving low and close to the building line, using the shadow cast by the second warehouse as cover. Marcus had been right about the layout. 4 buildings arranged in a rough square around a central loading yard. Building 3, the one with the most recent electrical work on record, according to the county permits Marcus had pulled, was the one with light coming through the upper ventilation slats. He'd counted 6 vehicles in the yard. 2 were the convoy SUVs. The others had been here waiting, pre-positioned. He circled the building slowly, taking his time, which felt wrong given the clock but was necessary. Rushing an entry without intelligence was how you got someone killed, yourself or the person you were trying to bring out. He found the secondary loading bay on the south face, partially open, the roll-up door raised about 18 inches from the ground, ventilation or an exit they wanted to keep ready. He got close enough to hear voices. 2 men, casual conversation, the kind of talk people had when they were doing a job they'd done before and weren't worried about it. One of them was complaining about a delayed flight. The other was talking about a payment schedule. They were positioned near the bay door, smokers. He could smell it, which was why the door was cracked. He backed away and kept circling. The north face had a personnel door, standard commercial steel, with a keypad lock. He spent 45 seconds examining it from a distance. The keypad was active, green indicator, which meant the power for the complex had been brought online specifically for tonight. Someone had organized utilities for this location in advance. He pulled out his phone. 1 bar, intermittent. "Marcus," he said quietly, "I'm here. What do you see?" 6 vehicles in the yard, Building 3 is active. I've got 2 guards on a south loading bay, a locked personnel door on the north. I need to know how many rooms Building 3 has. Interior layout isn't on the permits, but it was a fabrication facility before the closure. Those are usually one main floor with office mezzanine, maybe partitioned sections along the east wall for equipment storage. A pause. "Nathan, I've been making calls while you were moving. You're not going to like what I found." "Tell me." The convoy's security contractor. The comms frequency for tonight's operation was only distributed to 3 people above the driver level. The contractor's ops manager, Bennett Dynamics' in-house security director, and 1 executive sign-off. Nathan waited. The in-house security director is named Derek Sullivan. He's been with the company 6 years. 3 months ago, he started routing his personal finances through a shell company in the Caymans. "Who found that?" "I did. Just now in the last 15 minutes. It's not deep, it's just not the kind of thing anyone was looking for." Marcus paused. "He's the one who rescheduled her meeting tonight. It was his recommendation that she travel tonight instead of tomorrow morning." Nathan stood in the dark outside Building 3 and let that settle into place. It fit. It fit the way the pieces of a thing fit when they're the actual pieces. Not forced, just complete. Derek Sullivan had given them the route, the frequencies, the timing, and the reason to move tonight. He was also presumably the person who had access to whatever corporate data these people needed Olivia to authenticate. "She's in there because of someone she trusted," Nathan said. "Yeah." He thought about that for a moment. Not with anger exactly, something more useful than anger. "I need a distraction on the south side in about 12 minutes, he said. "Something that draws the 2 guards away from that bay door without triggering an internal alarm." "What kind of distraction?" "Something that looks accidental, vehicles, noise, something that reads as an external problem they need to investigate, not an attack." "I can do that," Marcus said. "I know a guy at the impound lot on Meridian, 12 minutes. Make it 11. He ended the call and turned back to the personnel door on the north face. The keypad was a standard commercial model, the kind that had a maintenance override used by facility management, a manufacturer default code that most installations never bothered to change because they assumed no one knew about them. Nathan had known about them for approximately 14 years. He crossed to the door, staying flat against the wall, and tried the override. The indicator went from green to amber. He waited 3 seconds, entered the secondary code. The lock disengaged. He stood at the edge of the doorway and listened to the interior of the building for a long moment before he moved. What he heard was consistent with what Marcus had predicted. A large open floor, multiple voices, the hum of electrical equipment, someone moving in a space that echoed. He could hear Olivia's voice at the far end of the space, even and measured, and the sound of it, the fact that she was speaking rather than silent or in distress, told him she was still in the early phase of whatever they had planned for her. She was buying time. She might not have known she was doing it, but she was. He slipped inside. The interior smelled like machine oil and old concrete and the sharp plastic scent of portable electronics running hard. The mezzanine was above him to the right. Stairs along the east wall, a catwalk that ran the full length of the building's interior. He could see 3 figures up there and one more moving on the main floor toward the back. He found a position behind a row of industrial shelving units left over from the facility's previous life, close enough to see the center of the main floor, and he took stock. Olivia was in a chair, center floor. He counted 4 men at various positions around her. The man talking to her, older, gray-haired, calm, was the one running this. Victor, whoever he was, stood to one side. 2 more men at the fold-out table with the electronics, plus the 2 on the south bay and whoever was upstairs. 12, at minimum. He checked his watch. 8 minutes until Marcus's distraction. He settled into the shadows behind the shelving, controlled his breathing, and listened. "You understand that I'm cooperating," Olivia was saying, her voice carrying clearly across the open floor. "I'm not going to pretend I have options I don't have, but I need 20 minutes with my CFO directly, not a photograph, a live call, on speaker, in front of you. If you've done this before, you know that an authorization of this size requires a direct verbal confirmation from the account holder. Paul will stall if he can't hear my voice." The gray-haired man considered this. 5 minutes? 10. 7. "Fine," she said. 7 minutes. Nathan almost smiled at that. She was negotiating a phone call she almost certainly planned to use for something other than authorizing a wire transfer. She was buying time and doing it without appearing to, which required a specific kind of composure that most people didn't find in situations like this one. He moved 2 positions to his left, getting a better angle on the staircase. One man up top was walking the catwalk with the body language of someone bored and cold. The second was seated at the mezzanine rail, watching the floor below. The third hadn't moved. 7 minutes. Then her phone call. Then they'd want the biometric authentication. He needed to be in position before that window opened, because once they started moving her toward the equipment on that table, everything would accelerate in ways that got complicated. He began to move through the shadows toward the east wall. He was about 40 feet from the base of the stairs when he heard the distant sound from the south. Something heavy, metal on metal. The kind of noise an impound truck makes when it misjudges a turn and clips a fence post. Then voices outside, loud enough to carry through the walls. Then one of the South Bay guards' voices, distinct, calling to the other, "What the hell is that?" He heard the bay door scrape open. He was already at the staircase. The man on the catwalk above turned toward the south end of the building, distracted by the noise from outside. He had maybe 4 seconds with the man's back partially turned. Nathan took the stairs in 6 steps and was on the catwalk before the man completed his turn. The second guard at the rail heard something, the vibration of footsteps on the metal grate, and started to rise from his chair. He didn't finish. By the time Marcus's distraction faded, and the South Bay guards called in that it was nothing, just a truck that had clipped the fence, the mezzanine was quiet, and Nathan was crouched behind the rail looking down at the main floor, watching the gray-haired man pace slowly behind Olivia's chair, while Victor watched the bay door with a frown. 11 men. 3 accounted for silently. 8 remaining on the main floor and outside. Nathan checked his watch, shifted his weight carefully on the catwalk grating, and began working out the geometry of what came next. The warehouse was cold and smelled like old metal, and the kind of tension that accumulates in a space where people are waiting for something to happen, and beneath all of it, very faintly, Nathan could still hear Olivia's voice, level, precise, running out the clock, with the gray-haired man over the terms of a phone call she had absolutely no intention of using the way he thought she would. 8 men. 1 woman who was sharper than anyone in that room had given her credit for. He'd worked with worse odds. The catwalk grating was cold under his palms and made a sound like a held breath every time he shifted his weight. Nathan had spent the last 4 minutes working through the geometry of the main floor from above, and the geometry was not comfortable. 8 men remaining, 2 still outside on the South Bay, 6 on the floor below, plus the gray-haired man who was running the operation, and Victor, who moved with the particular restlessness of someone who trusted his instincts, and whose instincts were currently telling him something was wrong. That made 8, plus the leader and Victor, which made 10 if you counted the principals as threats, which Nathan did, because men who organized operations like this one did not organize them from a position of personal passivity. The electronics table was the problem. 2 men seated at laptops, running what looked like a remote access toolkit. He could see the screen glow from the mezzanine angle, the cascade of command windows that meant they were already inside Bennett Dynamics' network at some level, probing the perimeter of whatever authentication wall was keeping them out of the core architecture files. They weren't waiting for the biometric confirmation to start working. They were running parallel tracks. Ransom on one side, data extraction on the other, with Olivia as the key that unlocked the vault when the other approaches failed. Sophisticated. Patient. Expensive. Nathan filed all of it and focused on what was immediately in front of him. The mezzanine ran east to west across the full width of the building. The staircase at the east wall was the one he'd used. There was a second staircase at the west end, a fire egress, metal, steeper, terminating behind a support column on the main floor that would give him cover for approximately 2 seconds before anyone on the floor had a sightline to it. 2 seconds was workable. It was not comfortable, but it was workable. He needed to reduce the numbers on the main floor before he came down, and he needed to do it without triggering a response from the two men still outside. The moment someone inside raised an alarm, shouted, fired a weapon, keyed a radio, the South Bay guards would come through that door, and the math would stop being manageable. He thought about the phone call. Olivia had negotiated 7 minutes, and those 7 minutes were almost certainly still running. He could hear her voice below, slower now, more deliberate, the cadence of someone who was stretching each sentence as far as it would go without sounding like she was stretching it. And you have to understand that Paul has a secondary authorization protocol that kicks in automatically on transfers above 30 million. That's not something I control. It's a regulatory compliance mechanism that, Ms. Bennett, the gray-haired man's voice, patient but closing in on the limit of its patience. The transfer amount is non-negotiable. I'm not negotiating the amount. I'm telling you the mechanics. A pause. You've clearly done your research. Did your research include the Dodd-Frank compliance architecture my CFO implemented 18 months ago? Because if it didn't, this transfer is going to bounce in 6 hours and trigger an automatic federal notification. Silence on the floor below. Then the gray-haired man said something quiet to Victor that Nathan couldn't catch, and Victor moved toward the electronics table. She was buying time and it was working, but it had a ceiling. Nathan moved west along the catwalk, staying flat and slow, testing each step before committing his weight. The third man on the mezzanine, the one he'd assessed earlier as stationary, was seated against the west wall with his back to the rail, eating something from a paper wrapper and looking at his phone. The phone's screen was the only light on this side of the mezzanine. Nathan covered the last 15 feet in 8 controlled steps and dealt with him in approximately 4 seconds. The paper wrapper crinkled once. The phone dropped and Nathan caught it before it hit the grating, which was the part that mattered. He checked the phone out of reflex. It was locked, which was expected, and the signal showed 2 bars, which was useful. It meant Marcus's monitoring would have better accuracy from here. He moved to the west staircase and looked down. The support column at the base gave him the 2 seconds he'd estimated. Beyond the column, the nearest man on the floor was the one standing by the South Bay door interior, stationed there to relay communication with the outside guards, close enough to the door that he'd be the first one through if something happened outside. That man needed to be first. The second priority was the 2 at the electronics table, because once the data extraction equipment was compromised, it couldn't be uncompromised, and whatever they were building toward accessing would still be accessible even if Olivia was out of the building. He called Marcus. 1 ring. Status, Marcus said. 3 on the mezzanine are down. 10 remaining on the main floor, 2 outside. I'm at the west staircase. He kept his voice barely above a breath. I need the power. A beat. Say again. The building power. They've got it running on external supply. There's a generator or a temporary hookup, probably accessed from the utility panel on the north face. I need it to go dark for 30 seconds, not longer. Nathan, if I cut the power, they're going to know something is wrong. They're going to know that in about 4 minutes anyway. I need 30 seconds of darkness and confusion before the backup lighting kicks on. Marcus was quiet for a moment. The utility panel on the north face, I can access the service shutoff remotely if it's a smart meter. Give me 90 seconds. You've got 60. He ended the call and positioned himself at the top of the west staircase. Weight forward, body low. Below him, the main floor continued its controlled tension. Olivia talking, Victor pacing. The 2 men at the laptops working with quiet focus, the others positioned at intervals that suggested assigned posts rather than improvised standing. He counted to 50. Then the lights went out. Not gradually. The same way the tunnel had gone dark, instant and total, the overhead industrials cutting off mid-hum, the laptop screens the only remaining light, 2 pale rectangles floating in the black, and then someone's flashlight coming on, and then 2 more. The beams crossing and recrossing the space in the first 3 seconds of disorientation that were exactly what Nathan needed. He was down the stairs and behind the support column before the first flashlight found anything useful. The man by the South Bay door had turned toward the interior, flashlight up, looking for the source of the problem. He had his back 3/4 to Nathan and his radio halfway to his mouth. Nathan crossed the distance in 4 steps. The radio never transmitted. He moved immediately left, staying below the flashlight beams, putting the support column between himself and the 2 men at the table who were now standing, one of them reaching for something on his belt. In the dark and the crossed lights, with 2 people on the mezzanine unaccounted for, as far as anyone below knew, the confusion was real and useful. "What the hell?" Victor's voice, sharp. "Stay calm." The gray-haired man immediately. "It's the generator. Reyes, check the panel." One of the men from the interior pulled away from his post and moved toward the north wall. That was 3 now moving or distracted. Nathan tracked the remaining flashlight beams and put himself behind the electronics table, coming around its back edge in the dark. The man seated there felt his presence as a change in the air and started to turn. Nathan put him down quietly and kept moving. The second man at the table had stood up and taken 2 steps toward Victor. Nathan let him get 3 steps further from the table, enough distance from the equipment that taking him down wouldn't disturb anything on the laptops, and then dealt with him against the side of the shelving unit nearest the east wall. 5 seconds of silence following the collision, which wasn't quite as quiet as he'd wanted. The shelving unit rang like a dull bell. Victor's flashlight swept the area. "Somebody's in here?" "How?" The gray-haired man's voice had changed, still controlled, but the quality of its control had shifted from a man managing a routine operation to a man managing an unexpected one. "I told you about the driver," Victor said. His voice had dropped. He was moving now. Nathan could hear the change in his footsteps, the shift from a standing man to a moving one. "I told you." "It's not the driver. Reyes is not answering," Victor said. 3 people not answering, the power goes out, something hit the shelving, it's not the generator." The backup lighting came on. Not the full overhead system. A set of emergency strips along the base of the walls that cast everything in a low, flat amber that was somehow worse than the darkness, because it showed you some things and hid others in long, shallow shadows. Nathan was in one of those shadows, behind the shelving row nearest the east wall, and he took stock in the amber light. Victor was moving toward the center of the floor, gun out, turning a slow circle. The gray-haired man had positioned himself behind Olivia's chair, using her, which told Nathan exactly what kind of man he was when the situation stopped going according to plan. 2 other men on the floor were moving toward the electronics table, and what they found there stopped them. "We have a problem," one of them said quietly, to no one in particular. Olivia had not moved. She was sitting completely still in the chair with her zip-tied hands in her lap, and Nathan could see from his angle that her eyes were moving, cataloging the room and the emergency lighting the same way he was. She was counting, she was tracking, she had been doing that the entire time. She was also, he noticed now, holding her hands differently than she had been before the lights went out. The zip tie was still on her wrists, but the angle had changed. Her palms were facing slightly inward rather than down, which was the position your hands went into when you'd been quietly working a plastic restraint against the edge of something hard for the better part of an hour. She'd been loosening it herself, in millimeter increments, while she talked. He revised his assessment of her upward for the 3rd time tonight. Victor had stopped turning. His flashlight was off now. He was working in the emergency strips like the professional he was, using cover rather than light. That made him more dangerous and harder to track. Nathan could hear him more than see him, the careful weight shift of a man who had trained for exactly this kind of situation. "Driver," Victor said to the room. Not loudly, conversationally. "I know you're in here. I've got your principal in the center of the room, and I've got 4 men outside who are going to come through that door in about 2 minutes when they don't hear a check-in." Nathan said nothing. "I'm not going to ask you to come out," Victor continued. "I'm going to tell you something true, which is that this operation has more moving parts than what you've seen tonight, and the part that concerns your principal's company is already in motion regardless of what happens in this building." Nathan remained still. "There's a cyber attack running right now," Victor said, "against Bennett Dynamics Network. Not from here, from 3 other locations simultaneously. We've been inside the perimeter since 7:30 this evening. What we needed from Ms. Bennett was authentication for the core files, but we've been pulling ancillary data for the last 4 hours. Even if you get her out of this building, her company's data is already compromised. He was trying to reframe the situation, trying to make Nathan's success pointless. It was a reasonable tactic. It was also, Nathan noted, information. Victor had told him something true because he believed it would be demoralizing. Instead, it was operational intelligence. 3 other locations running a simultaneous cyber attack, active since 7:30. That meant there was a coordination point, someone managing the timing across 4 simultaneous operations, which meant a centralized command structure, which meant Marcus, with the right information and the right contacts, could potentially find it. But first things first. "Victor," Nathan said. Silence. Then, "There he is. Walk me through what you think happens next," Nathan said. His voice came from near the east wall shelving, which was where Victor's flashlight immediately swept. "You've got a driver who came in from the north face, took out 3 on the mezzanine and 3 on the floor without triggering your outside team. You've got 9 people who went dark without a radio call. You've got 2 men outside who are going to start wondering why no one's checking in. And when they come through that door, they're going to find the same situation you're finding right now." He paused. "The part I'm curious about is what you think your move is." Another silence, longer this time. "My move," Victor said, "is this." He came out of the shadow near the south wall with his arm around Olivia's neck and his gun against her temple. And for a half-second, Nathan felt the specific cold clarity of a situation becoming its worst version of itself. Olivia had her hands free. The zip tie was on the floor somewhere. She must have slipped it in the moment the lights went. But her hands were at her sides, and Victor's forearm was across her collarbone, and none of the leverage advantages of having free hands were currently available to her. She met Nathan's eyes across the amber-lit floor. He looked at her and gave the smallest, most deliberate shake of his head. "Don't." She understood. He could see it in the way she fractionally relaxed, shifting her weight back rather than forward. She was listening for instruction. The gray-haired man had straightened up from behind the chair. He looked tired and angry, in the particular way of someone who'd planned meticulously and was watching the plan become something else. "Who are you?" he asked Nathan. "I was her driver," Nathan said. "Before that." Nathan didn't answer. "Nathan, before that?" the gray-haired man said again, with a kind of flat exhaustion. "Because what I'm looking at isn't a driver." Victor shifted his grip slightly. Olivia made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp, more the sound a person made when a forearm moved against a bruise they'd sustained earlier in the evening. Victor registered it as control. Nathan registered it as Victor dropping his chin by approximately 2 centimeters to look at her face, which moved the gun's muzzle from her right temple to a position slightly forward and above her ear. 1 centimeter of movement from Victor translating into a meaningful change in geometry. Nathan had spent 15 years studying the geometry of moments like this one. "Here's the actual situation," Nathan said, keeping his voice even, directing it at the gray-haired man rather than at Victor, because the gray-haired man was the decision-maker and Victor was the instrument. "You've lost this location, you've lost your equipment, and you've lost your team here. The outside men are going to come in, and when they do, the situation doesn't improve. It just gets louder. Your exit window is closing right now." He paused. "But the data operations, the 3 other locations, that's still running. You walk out of here, you still have that. You walk out with her, you have a federal kidnapping charge and a running clock until every asset you have gets frozen." The gray-haired man watched him. "You're suggesting I leave." "I'm telling you the math. Victor doesn't leave without the authentication. Victor," Nathan said, shifting his attention, "is about to make a decision that ends very badly for Victor." He said it the way he said most things in rooms like this one, not as a threat, just as a statement of fact, the way you'd tell someone it was raining. "I've seen you move. You're good. But you dropped your chin when she made that sound, and your muzzle shifted 14 degrees. You know that I know that. So we're standing here in the same moment, looking at each other, and you're doing the same math I'm doing." Victor's jaw was tight. His eyes were steady. The eyes of someone who was genuinely skilled and knew it, and was using that knowledge to assess whether Nathan was genuinely skilled or bluffing. Nathan looked back at him without blinking. He was not bluffing. He was also not certain, which was the honest answer. Certainty was not available in moments like this one. What was available was a clear read of the geometry, a body that had been trained to act faster than conscious thought, and the specific absence of hesitation that came from having made a decision before you were in the room rather than during. He'd made it in the tunnel when he could have waited for police. "Put her down, Victor," the gray-haired man said. Victor's head turned fractionally toward his employer. That was the fatal mistake. Not the turn itself. The turn was small, a reflex, a man checking in with his principal for a half-second. The mistake was that it was preceded by a microsecond of decision, the moment where the body's attention shifts before the head does, and that microsecond was a gap in the geometry that had not existed before. Olivia felt it too. He could see it in the way her weight shifted. Forward, just barely, her left foot sliding 2 inches. Nathan moved, not toward Victor. Toward the electronics table and the rolling equipment case beside it, which he kicked hard and sideways into Victor's peripheral path, in the same motion he was using to close the distance to Olivia's right side. Victor's gun tracked toward the movement. The case, not Nathan, a reflex response to the nearest motion. And Olivia drove her elbow back into his solar plexus with the full rotation of her torso behind it, the kind of strike that worked regardless of size differential because it had physics rather than strength behind it. Victor's grip broke. Nathan had his arm in the same moment, the gun hand controlling the wrist, the muzzle pointed at the ceiling, and it was over in 2 seconds from initial movement to the point where Victor was against the concrete floor with Nathan's knee on his shoulder and the weapon skidding away across the floor. He was breathing harder than he wanted to be. His knee was going to hurt tomorrow. Old injury, right side. A souvenir from a roof in a place he couldn't name in a year he preferred not to think about. He filed the pain and stayed focused. Olivia was standing 2 feet away, rubbing her collarbone where Victor's forearm had been, looking at Nathan with an expression that was not quite shock and not quite relief and not quite anything he had a simple name for. The gray-haired man had not moved. He was looking at the situation on the floor. Victor face down, the scattered equipment, 8 of his people unaccounted for on the interior, with the expression of a man recalculating something fundamental. "The 2 outside," Nathan said to him. "They'll be in approximately 90 seconds, the gray-haired man said. He sounded almost thoughtful. "Tell them to stand down." A long pause. "And if I do?" "Then this is a federal case and not a scene," Nathan said. "You're smart enough to know the difference." The gray-haired man picked up his radio. He spoke 4 words into it. "Stand down. Come in." Then he set the radio on the ground and put his hands at his sides, and he looked at Nathan with the flat, assessing look of a man who had underestimated something and was cataloging the details of that mistake for future reference. "Who did you work for?" he asked. "Nobody you'd know," Nathan said. Olivia turned to the electronics table. The laptops were still running, screens still active, command windows scrolling. She stared at them for a moment and then looked at Nathan. "He said there are 3 other locations running simultaneous attacks." "I know. That's the real operation. This was a distraction, or an accelerant." She was moving toward the laptops already, her voice sharpening, the particular focus of someone who understood exactly what they were looking at. "If they've had perimeter access since 7:30, and they've been pulling ancillary data..." She stopped. She looked at one of the screens, and her face changed. "They're not just stealing the architecture." "What are they doing?" She looked up at him. "They're using our own security infrastructure to build a backdoor into every client network we service. If this completes..." She stopped. "We have 412 enterprise clients. Government contractors, financial institutions, critical infrastructure operators. If this backdoor gets embedded, who has the access to authorize this from inside your company?" Nathan asked. "Not the outside team. Someone internal gave them the network access at 7:30. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see her working through the same names she'd worked through in the back seat. Claire, Derek, Marcus Trent, the contractor. He watched her land on the same one he'd landed on. "Derek," she said. The name came out quiet and flat, the way names came out when someone was not quite ready to say them out loud. "Derek Sullivan," Nathan said. "You're head of security." She absorbed that for a moment, not with visible emotion, more like someone receiving information they had some preparation for, but still needed a moment to fully accept. How long have you known? Marcus Webb. He's a contact of mine. He's been running intelligence support tonight. He found the financial irregularities about an hour ago. Sullivan's been routing money through a shell company for 3 months. He watched her face. I'm sorry. That's a particular kind of betrayal. Yes, she said. Then quietly, we need to stop the other locations. I know. That's going to require your cooperation with people who have more reach than I do. He looked at her steadily. And it's going to require going back to your building before sunrise. The South Bay door opened. The 2 outside guards came in slowly, hands visible. They'd heard enough from the radio and found enough in the ambient situation to understand that the terms had changed. They stopped just inside the door and looked at Nathan and looked at the gray-haired man and waited. Olivia Bennett stood in the amber emergency lighting of the abandoned warehouse with her hair loose and her collarbone bruised and someone else's sleeve rolled up over her forearm where the zip tie had left a mark. And she looked around the space, the scattered equipment, the men on the floor, the laptops still scrolling through her company's most protected systems. And Nathan could see her shifting from the part of herself that had just survived something to the part of herself that had built a billion-dollar company from the ground up. And those 2 parts were not as different as most people would have assumed. Okay, she said. She said it to herself as much as to him. Just that word. Just once. The way someone said it when they were closing the door on one room and opening the door to the next. Okay. She picked up one of the laptops carefully, without disturbing the running processes. She turned to Nathan. Can your contact track the source of this connection? If it's routing through a VPN chain, there'll be handshake logs. The timing signatures might be enough to triangulate the other locations. I'll get him on it, Nathan said. He was already reaching for his phone. His knee was going to be bad tomorrow. There was a cut on his forearm he hadn't noticed acquiring. Something from the catwalk grating, probably. Not deep. Just the kind of thing that announced itself after the fact. He was cold, and his left shoulder ached from the angle he'd used on the man at the electronics table. And in the back of his mind, very quietly, the part of him that had been 8 years out of the teams and building a quieter life was filing all of this in a drawer it had hoped to keep closed. He dialed Marcus. You're alive, Marcus said. So far. I need you to pull something for me. The laptops here have been running a coordinated attack on the Bennett network since 7:30. I need you to find the other 3 locations before they complete. That's... Marcus paused. Nathan, that's federal. That's FBI Cyber Division. I know. Make the calls. I'll explain later. Are you? I'm okay. She's okay. He looked at Olivia, who was studying the laptop screen with the focused intensity of someone who had just decided they were going to burn down everything that had been built against them and rebuild it correctly. We're coming in. He ended the call and looked at the gray-haired man who was still standing with his hands at his sides, watching him. What's your name? Nathan asked. The man considered this. Harlan, he said finally. Harlan. The operation you're running has a principal who gave you inside access to a target you couldn't have reached without him. When the federal case opens, that individual's exposure is considerably worse than yours. I'd think about that before you decide how much to cooperate. Harlan looked at him with those pale, washed-out eyes. You think I don't know that? I think you probably do, Nathan said. I think you also know that the man who hired you already has an exit strategy that doesn't involve protecting you. A long pause. Something moved behind Harlan's eyes, the slow adjustment of a man who had built his plan around certain loyalties and was, in the span of one ruined evening, revising his understanding of what those loyalties were actually worth. His name, Harlan said, is Sullivan. Nathan looked at him. Derek Sullivan gave you the order directly. He gave us the access. He gave us the target. He gave us the timeline. Harlan's voice had gone to something flat and deliberate. He also told us that if anything went wrong, the operation would be attributed entirely to external actors, and he would provide documentation supporting that narrative. He paused. I'd like to talk to whoever you're calling. You'll get that chance, Nathan said. He looked at Olivia. She'd heard all of it. She'd heard Harlan confirm what they already knew, and she'd heard it with the laptop in her hands and her company's compromised infrastructure scrolling across the screen, and what he saw on her face was not the devastation of betrayal, but something harder and quieter and more purposeful than that. "Let's go," she said. Outside, the rain had stopped. The Port District was still dark and still, the distant lights of the city reflecting off the wet pavement in long orange streaks. The air smelled like rust and seawater, and the specific cold clarity that comes after rain. And Nathan Brooks stood for a moment in the loading yard of the abandoned Kessler complex with a woman he'd been hired to drive and had instead spent the last several hours keeping alive. And he thought about his daughter asleep on Kellner Street and about Mrs. Pacheco who would be gone by 6 a.m., and about the fact that whatever came next was going to happen fast and before sunrise and was not going to be simple. He thought about Derek Sullivan, who had worked beside Olivia Bennett for 6 years and had spent at least 3 of them building something against her. Then he moved to the nearest of the convoy SUVs, keys still in, engine cold but functional, and opened the driver's door. Some habits were harder to break than others. The drive back took 23 minutes. Nathan drove and Olivia sat in the passenger seat this time, not the back, which was a small thing that meant something neither of them acknowledged directly. The laptop was open on her knees, its screen casting pale light across her face as she worked, navigating through the Bennett Dynamics network with the focused efficiency of someone who knew every corridor of her own building and was checking each one for fire. She didn't talk much during the drive. When she did, it was precise and purposeful, asking Nathan to relay specific technical details to Marcus, who was on speaker through Nathan's phone and had spent the last 18 minutes making calls that were waking up federal cybersecurity contacts he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "The handshake logs are there," she said, scrolling. 3 external nodes. 2 are routing through commercial VPN chains, but the timing signatures are consistent. They all went active within 4 minutes of each other at 7:31. Someone threw a switch. She paused. "The third one is different. It's routing through our own internal monitoring infrastructure." "That's Sullivan's work," Nathan said. "It has to be. The internal monitoring system. Only 4 people have administrative credentials. Me, Derek, our CTO, and the contractor we use for compliance audits." She closed her eyes briefly. He used our own security tools to let them in. The system would have logged it as routine monitoring activity. We wouldn't have flagged it for days. "Is the CTO on the board?" Nathan asked. "The meeting you're walking into. Who's going to be there?" She looked at him. "How do you know I'm walking into a board meeting?" "Because you said the kidnappers wanted to steal the IP and manipulate the board into surrendering control of the company. If Sullivan was coordinating both tracks, the physical operation tonight was timed to coincide with something happening at the corporate level, something that needs board approval." She was quiet for a moment, then, "There's an emergency board resolution scheduled for 6 a.m. Derek called it 2 days ago. He told me it was a precautionary governance measure because of the acquisition. Standard risk management language. I approved it without reading the specific agenda items." She said the last sentence with a controlled flatness that was the closest thing to self-reproach he'd heard from her. "The resolution authorizes a restructuring of the company's security infrastructure and the appointment of an interim executive authority in the event the CEO is deemed unavailable." "Unavailable," Nathan said. "Tonight, I was supposed to be unavailable," she said. The city was coming back around them, the Port District giving way to the industrial margin and then to the wider streets of the financial district. The buildings getting taller and the lights getting thicker, the ordinary machinery of a city in the hours before dawn. It was 4:47 in the morning. The board meeting was in 73 minutes. "Marcus," Nathan said to the phone. "The 3 nodes. I've got federal cyber on the line," Marcus said. His voice had the compressed energy of someone running 3 conversations simultaneously. "They're pulling the nodes now, the 2 VPN chains they can disrupt within 20 minutes. They've got cooperative providers on both. The internal node is going to require direct action at the source, meaning someone with administrative credentials needs to revoke Sullivan's access manually before the exfiltration completes." "How long before it completes?" Olivia asked. "At current transfer rate? 40 to 50 minutes?" She looked at the clock on the laptop. "We have enough time," she said. "Barely." "There's one more thing," Marcus said. "The federal agents I spoke to, they're aware of Sullivan, not because of tonight. They've had a separate investigation open for 11 weeks. Wire fraud, securities manipulation, breach of fiduciary duty. Tonight accelerated their timeline, but they were already building a case." Nathan glanced at Olivia. She was staring at the laptop screen without seeing it. 11 weeks, she said. Quiet. Not a question. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said. She absorbed that. 11 weeks of an open federal investigation into her head of security, a man who sat 40 feet from her office and attended her strategy meetings and reviewed her travel itineraries. 11 weeks of that existing without her knowledge. He could see the specific quality of that settling onto her, not collapsing, just landing, the weight of it becoming part of what she was carrying. "Okay," she said, for the second time that night. Same word, same closed-door quality. "When we get to the building, I need 10 minutes with my CTO before the board convenes. Marcus, is that your name? Marcus Webb?" "Yes, ma'am." "Can you stay on with us through the board meeting?" A brief pause. "I can do that." "Thank you." She looked at Nathan. "And you need to be in that room." "I'm a driver," Nathan said. "You were a driver for approximately 40 minutes. After that, you were something else." She held his gaze. "I need someone in that room who has already proven tonight that they can read a situation before it becomes a crisis. My executive team is not going to be happy about a stranger in a board meeting. I don't particularly care." He thought about pointing out that his presence in her board meeting was well outside the scope of what he'd been hired to do, which was drive a car. He thought about the cut on his forearm and his right knee, and the fact that Mrs. Pacheco would be leaving Kellner Street at 6 a.m., and Maya would wake up at 7, and he had no way to be in two places at once. He also thought about what Harlan had said. The man who hired you already has an exit strategy that doesn't involve protecting you. He thought about Derek Sullivan sitting in that building right now, knowing the warehouse operation had gone quiet, knowing his timeline was compromised, and deciding what his next move was. A man who planned at that level didn't have only one move. "I'll be in the room," Nathan said. Bennett Dynamics occupied the top 11 floors of a glass tower in Midtown, and at 4:59 in the morning it was running on skeleton staff. Night security, IT infrastructure, a handful of analysts who kept global operations humming through the overnight hours. The lobby guard recognized Olivia immediately and visibly tried not to react to her appearance. The loosened hair, the bruised collarbone visible above her collar, the fact that she walked in accompanied by a man in a driver's uniform carrying a laptop that wasn't hers. She didn't explain. She badged through and went straight to the elevator bank. "Get me James Whitfield," she said to the guard as the doors opened. "CTO, tell him I'm in the building and I need him in the executive conference room in 8 minutes." The elevator was mirrored on 3 sides, and Nathan caught his reflection as the doors closed. The uniform, the cut on his forearm that had bled through the sleeve, the general appearance of a man who had spent the last several hours doing things that didn't show up in his recent employment history. He looked like what he was, which was not always an advantage. Olivia caught his reflection too. She didn't look away from it. "When did you leave the Navy?" she asked. 8 years ago. "Why?" He'd answered that question a few times over the years to different people, and the answer had a longer version and a shorter one. "My wife died," he said. "My daughter was 3. I wasn't going to leave her alone." She was quiet for a moment. "What was your wife's name?" The question surprised him slightly. Most people didn't ask that. They expressed condolences and moved on, which was fine. He preferred that generally. He wasn't sure why she asked it or why it felt like the right question. "Rachel," he said. "I'm sorry." "Thank you." The elevator opened on the 41st floor. The executive level was quiet and very clean, the kind of space that existed in a different atmospheric layer from the warehouse they'd left 40 minutes ago. Thick carpet, low lighting on motion sensors, the long corridor of glass-walled offices running toward the main conference room at the end. Most of the offices were dark. One was not. Olivia saw it at the same moment Nathan did. The light in the corner office, third from the end, which she didn't need to tell him was Derek Sullivan's office, because the nameplate was visible from here. The blinds were partially closed, but not fully, and the shape moving behind them was the shape of a man who was not sitting calmly at his desk, but pacing, covering ground, working through something. He knew they were coming, not necessarily from the building's entry log, that would take a moment to check, but from the silence out of the warehouse. When an operation went quiet at a time it wasn't supposed to, the people connected to it started moving. Sullivan had been moving since the moment his phone stopped telling him what he needed to hear. Olivia put her hand on Nathan's arm. Briefly. Just a touch, the kind that communicated something without using words, and then she moved it. "James first," she said quietly. "I need the network access revoked before I face Derek. If the exfiltration completes before I pull his credentials, none of the rest of it matters." Nathan nodded. "I'll stay between you and his office." "I know you will," she said, simply, without drama. James Whitfield was 52, tall, with the slightly rumpled look of a man who'd been pulled out of bed and had done his best with it. He was in the conference room when they arrived, standing at the head of the table with a coffee he'd clearly made himself in the small kitchen off the corridor, and when Olivia walked in, he took one look at her and set the coffee down. "Olivia," his voice went careful. "What happened?" "I'll tell you everything in a few hours. Right now I need you to listen." She set the laptop on the conference table. "Derek Sullivan has administrative access to the monitoring infrastructure. He's been using it as a relay point for an external data exfiltration that's been running since 7:30 tonight. I need his credentials revoked immediately. Every level of access, system by system, right now, before 40 minutes is up." Whitfield stared at her, then at the laptop, then at Nathan. "This is Nathan Brooks," Olivia said. "He's with me." Whitfield seemed to accept that the way people in crisis accepted things that would normally require more explanation. He sat down at the laptop, turned it toward himself, and started typing. His hands moved with the particular speed of someone who had spent 30 years in systems architecture and whose fingers knew the paths before his conscious mind fully caught up. "If I revoke his access at the monitoring level first, the exfiltration stops, but it may trigger an alert on his end," Whitfield said without looking up. "Let it trigger," Olivia said. "I want him to know." Whitfield glanced up at that. Something passed across his face. Recognition of what she was doing, what she'd already decided. He went back to typing. "Monitoring level, done. Pulling server access, VPN credentials. Killing those now. Network administration panel," he stopped. "Olivia, he's in the network administration panel, right now, active session. Override it." "I'm overriding. He's going to feel that instantly." "I know." Whitfield executed the override. For a moment, the room was completely silent except for the soft percussion of keys and the distant hum of the building's climate system. Then Whitfield exhaled. "All credentials revoked. Active sessions terminated. I'm logging the exfiltration attempt now and preserving the access records." He looked up. "This is going to be a criminal matter." "It already is," Olivia said. "Federal agents are coordinating the shutdown of the external nodes right now. By the time the board convenes, the Bureau will have field teams at 3 locations." She straightened. "I need you at that table this morning. I need you to be able to confirm what you just saw and what you did." "Of course." He looked at her bruised collarbone again, and there was something in his face, not just professional concern, something more personal, the kind of look a person gave when they'd known someone for years and were recalibrating who that person was. "Are you all right?" "I'll answer that later," she said. She was already moving toward the door. Bartsin. The hallway was the same as it had been 40 seconds earlier and completely different. The light in Sullivan's office was brighter now, or seemed brighter, the blinds less of a barrier. Nathan could see the shape behind them clearly, no longer pacing, standing still. He'd felt the access revocation. He knew. Olivia walked toward the office with a steadiness that Nathan recognized from the tunnel and the warehouse and every moment in between. The particular forward motion of someone who had made their decision before the situation was fully resolved and was simply closing the distance. She didn't walk fast. She didn't slow down. She pushed the door open. Derek Sullivan was standing behind his desk. He was in his 50s, broad-shouldered, with the fading remnants of the physical authority that had probably served him well in whatever law enforcement or military background had gotten him hired in the first place. He had his jacket on, which meant he'd either never gone home or had come in early. His phone was face down on the desk. His hands were at his sides. He looked at Olivia, then at Nathan. His face went through several things quickly before settling on something flat and prepared, the face of a man who had rehearsed this moment and was now running the rehearsal. "Olivia," he said, "I've been trying to reach you for hours. When the convoy went dark—" "Don't," she said. Not loudly, just that word. He stopped. "James just revoked your network access," she said. "The exfiltration has stopped. Harlan's team is in federal custody. Victor Kane is in federal custody. The 3 external nodes are being shut down right now." She stood in the doorway and looked at him steadily. "The Bureau has had an open investigation on you for 11 weeks. It ends this morning." The rehearsed expression shifted, not into panic, something more complicated. The face of a man who had told himself a story about how this might go and was watching the story become something else. "You don't know everything," he said. "I know enough." "The board resolution," he started. "The board resolution is going to be withdrawn before the meeting is called to order," she said. "And then the board is going to hear a full account of what happened tonight, supported by federal documentation and the testimony of your own contractors, one of whom has already provided your name voluntarily." She paused. "Derek, it's over." Something changed in the room. Nathan felt it before he saw it. The particular shift in atmosphere that came when a situation that had been moving in one direction changed direction, when a man who had been calculating his options finished calculating and arrived at an answer that wasn't the one he'd been hoping for. Sullivan's hand moved toward the desk drawer. "Don't," Nathan said. The word was quiet, exactly as quiet as Olivia's had been a moment before, and carrying the same quality of not being a suggestion. Sullivan's hand stopped. He looked at Nathan. Really looked at him, the same assessment Victor had done in the warehouse, the same recalibration happening in real time. He'd known Nathan was in the building. He hadn't known what Nathan was exactly, and now he was finding out. He moved his hand away from the drawer. "Sit down," Nathan said. "The agents will be here in about 20 minutes. You can use that time to think about what cooperation looks like." "You don't have any authority here," Sullivan said. His voice was tight. "No," Nathan agreed. "I don't. But you already moved your hand away from that drawer, which means some part of you has already made a reasonable decision. Stay with that." Sullivan stared at him. The standoff had the particular quality of a thing that was going to resolve in one of 2 ways, and was deciding which one in real time. Nathan held it without moving, without looking away, and he felt the familiar weight of a moment that required nothing from him except stillness and patience. Not force, not threat, just the absolute willingness to wait out another man's decision-making process for as long as that process took. Sullivan sat down. Nathan exhaled once, slowly, through his nose. Olivia turned to him briefly, the smallest look, the kind that didn't need words, and then she stepped back into the hallway and called Marcus to update the federal timeline. Nathan remained in the doorway of Sullivan's office with his arms loose at his sides, not blocking the exit, not threatening, just present. Sullivan sat behind his desk with his hands visible on the desktop and his phone face down, and the particular stillness of a man who had run out of moves and was learning what that felt like. 3 minutes passed in silence. Then Sullivan said, "She should have known." His voice had lost the rehearsed quality. He sounded tired. "The security vulnerabilities in the network architecture, I flagged them 18 months ago. The board overrode my recommendations, cost concerns." He made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. $40 million to shore up the infrastructure, and they said no. And then 18 months later, someone offered me money to demonstrate exactly what I'd told them would happen. Nathan looked at him. "So you decided to prove your point." "I decided to get paid for being right. And the people whose data got stolen in the process." Sullivan was quiet. "The 400 clients," Nathan said. "The government contractors and the financial institutions, the infrastructure operators, their vulnerabilities aren't theoretical." "The exfiltration didn't complete," Sullivan said. "You stopped it. This time, Sullivan looked at his hands. He didn't answer. Nathan heard voices in the corridor. Olivia, and then another voice, then two more. The sound of the building beginning to come awake as the hour approached 6. Board members arriving early, probably summoned by the emergency resolution Sullivan had called. The morning was assembling itself around them, the ordinary machinery of a company's day beginning to run. And somewhere inside that machinery, the extraordinary events of the night were going to have to be made legible to people who had slept through all of them. He thought about Maya waking up at 7. He thought about the cut on his forearm and his right knee and the 47 minutes of sleep he was going to get before the day fully started. He thought about Rachel, briefly, the way he sometimes did in moments that were over but still humming with something. The particular frequency of a thing resolved but not quite settled. She would have had something to say about all of this. Probably something dry and accurate and mildly exasperated. He almost smiled. The door to the conference room opened and Olivia's voice carried clearly down the corridor. Call to order at 6:15. I want James at the table, and I want the federal documentation pulled up on the main screen before anyone sits down. If anyone asks why, tell them the CEO is in the building and she has something to say. She appeared in the hallway, moving back towards Sullivan's office. Behind her, Nathan could see 2 of the board members in the conference room doorway. Older men, suits, the look of people who had been pulled out of comfortable early mornings and were trying to understand what kind of meeting this was going to be. The agents are 12 minutes out, she told Nathan. She glanced into the office at Sullivan, who had not moved, then back at Nathan. Will you come into the meeting? Yes. You don't have to say anything. I just want you there. I understand. She nodded and turned back toward the conference room. Nathan stayed in Sullivan's doorway another moment. For what it's worth, Sullivan said quietly, without looking up, the vulnerabilities are still real. Someone is still going to try this again. I know, Nathan said. That's why she needs better people around her. He left Sullivan sitting at his desk and followed Olivia down the hall. The board meeting was not the kind of board meeting any of the 8 people in that conference room had attended before, and it showed. The members who'd arrived expecting a governance formality sat in the particular rigid posture of people who had been handed a situation that was outpacing their preparation for it. Olivia stood at the head of the table and did not sit down for the first 12 minutes, which Nathan understood was intentional. She was not going to manage this from a position of equivalence. She told them what had happened. Not everything, and not in the order it had occurred, but in the order that made the logic of it clear. The rescheduled meeting, the convoy, the warehouse, the simultaneous cyber attack, the board resolution Sullivan had called and what it was designed to accomplish. She presented it the way she'd presented everything else tonight, directly, without softening the parts that were uncomfortable, including the part where she acknowledged approving a board resolution without reading the full agenda items. One of the board members, a man named Carver, who Nathan assessed as the kind of person who converted discomfort into aggression as a defense mechanism, said, "This is an extraordinary set of claims to be making at 6 o'clock in the morning without—" "The documentation is on the screen behind you," Olivia said, without raising her voice. "The federal agents will be in this building in approximately 8 minutes and will be available to confirm the criminal case that's been open for 11 weeks. James Whitfield can confirm the network access records. And if you'd like additional confirmation, you're welcome to walk down the hall and speak to Derek Sullivan, who is currently sitting in his office." She paused. "I'd suggest waiting for the agents, though." Carver turned to look at the screen. He didn't say anything else. James Whitfield walked the board through the network logs in language that was clear enough for non-technical members and specific enough to be legally useful. Nathan sat against the wall, not at the table, and watched the room, and watched the door, and watched Olivia. And he did the same thing he'd been doing for the better part of 7 hours, which was pay attention to things that other people weren't paying attention to. What he was paying attention to now was the emergency exit at the far end of the conference room corridor. It had been closed when they arrived. It was still closed, but the sensor light above it had changed from green to amber, which meant it had been opened in the last 4 minutes and allowed to close again. The amber indicated a held-open event that had reset. He was on his feet and through the conference room door before he'd consciously finished the thought. The corridor was empty. The emergency exit at the far end was closed. He pushed through it into the stairwell, listened, heard footsteps going down, fast, not running but close to it, the sound of someone trying to move quickly without making noise and failing at the second part. He went down. Sullivan had left his office. The agents were still 8 minutes out. He'd used the 7 minutes since Nathan walked away to take the exit he'd been waiting for, the one he'd planned for. A man who planned at that level planned his exits first. Nathan caught him on the 37th floor landing. Sullivan heard him coming and stopped, turned. He had a bag, a small one, the kind you kept in a desk drawer, the kind that said this exit wasn't improvised. He looked at Nathan, and his face did the same calculation it had done upstairs. "Don't make this something it doesn't need to be," Nathan said. He wasn't breathing hard. The knee was complaining, and he was going to feel this descent for a week, but his voice was level. "I'm not going back up there," Sullivan said. "Okay," Nathan said. "Then we stand here until the agents arrive, which is going to be about 6 minutes." He positioned himself on the landing between Sullivan and the next flight down, not aggressively, just there, blocking the geometry without making it physical unless it needed to be. "Or we go back up and you walk into that meeting room and you sit down and you tell them what you told me, about the vulnerabilities, about the 18 months, the board overriding your recommendations." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's context. That's the difference between a man who made a bad decision and a man who has nothing to say for himself." Sullivan stared at him. "You're not a driver," he said. "No," Nathan said. "What are you?" Nathan thought about it for a moment. "I'm someone who drove a car for 8 months because it let me be home when my daughter needed me. Before that, I was something else." He watched Sullivan's face. "Neither thing is all of what I am, same as you." It was a quiet thing to say in a stairwell at 6 in the morning, and he wasn't sure why he said it. It wasn't strategic. It was just true. Sullivan stood on the landing with his bag in his hand and the stairwell echoing around them, and he looked at Nathan with the expression of a man who had spent the night being outmaneuvered and was encountering, here at the end of it, something he hadn't planned for, which was someone treating him as a person rather than a problem. It didn't fix anything. It didn't change the charges or the investigation or the 11 weeks of financial records that were going to be the foundation of his prosecution. But something in his posture shifted, the bag lowering slightly, the set of his jaw changing. He went back upstairs. Nathan followed him, and his knee ached on every step, and the building was almost fully awake around them by the time they reached the 41st floor. The agents came through the lobby 4 minutes later. 3 of them, suits, the particular efficient gravity of federal law enforcement, badges out, and already talking to the building security coordinator before the elevator doors closed. Nathan met them in the corridor outside the conference room, identified himself, and gave them 6 minutes of clear sequential accounting of the night's events, the warehouse, the personnel, the evidence chain Marcus had been building from outside, the laptops that were still in the conference room on the table. One of the agents, a woman named Reyes, which was an interesting coincidence Nathan noted and set aside, listened to him with the focused attention of someone who was very good at her job and was calibrating exactly how much of what she was hearing she could use and in what form. "You neutralized 12 people," she said at the end, not accusatory, just noting. "With restraint appropriate to the situation," Nathan said. "Any of them hurt badly?" "No, the 2 in the tunnel may have stiff necks." She almost smiled. "I'm going to need a full statement." "I know. I'll give you one after the board meeting concludes." He looked at her steadily. "The board needs another 20 minutes. The CEO needs to finish what she started, with her board, in her building. Can you give her that?" Reyes looked at him, then past him at the conference room door, then back. 20 minutes, she said. He went back inside. Olivia was still standing. The board was no longer sitting in rigid discomfort. They were leaning forward, asking questions, Whitfield answering half of them, Olivia answering the rest. Sullivan had been escorted by one of the agents to a separate room, and the conference room had settled into the particular focused energy of people who understood they were in a serious situation and had decided to be serious about it. Carver, Nathan noticed, was no longer asking skeptical questions. He was taking notes. Olivia looked up when Nathan came back in. The question on her face was small, and she asked it without words. "Well?" He gave a small nod. "Handled." She held his gaze for a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked back at the board and said, "The resolution Sullivan called is formally withdrawn. I'll be drafting a replacement governance measure that addresses the actual security vulnerabilities he identified 18 months ago, the ones this board declined to fund." She let that sit for a moment. "We're going to talk about that. Not today, but soon, and that conversation is going to be uncomfortable. I want everyone in this room to be ready for it." Nobody objected. Outside the glass walls of the conference room, Manhattan was beginning to assemble itself in the early light. The first faint gray of a morning coming on, the city shifting from its overnight skeleton to its daytime self, traffic building on the streets 41 floors below. Nathan could see it through the window at the far end of the room, the skyline doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous and entirely unconcerned with the specific human drama that had played out in its tunnels and warehouses and stairwells and corridors through the previous 7 hours. He checked his watch. 6:44. Maya would be up in 16 minutes. He pulled out his phone and sent Mrs. Pacheco a message asking if she could stay until 8. She responded in 30 seconds with a single thumbs up, which was one of the things he appreciated most about her. He put the phone away and looked at the room. The board, Whitfield, the federal documentation on the screen, Olivia at the head of the table with her collarbone bruised and her composure intact. And he felt the particular quality of a thing that was not finished but was no longer in danger of being lost. The way a fire feels when you've gotten enough water on it that you know it's not going to spread, even if the work of fully putting it out isn't done yet. He sat back against the wall, and he was very tired, and his knee hurt, and he stayed. The federal agents were in the building for 4 hours. Nathan gave his statement to Agent Reyes in a small conference room down the hall from the main one, seated across a table with a cup of coffee someone had brought him that he drank without tasting. He told her everything in the order it happened, without embellishment or omission, the same way he'd written after-action reports for 15 years. Factual, sequential, specific. She recorded it and asked clarifying questions that were precise and intelligent. And at the end, she looked at him across the table with the expression of someone who had heard a great many accounts of a great many events and was calibrating this one against all of them. "You went into that warehouse alone," she said. "Marcus Webb was providing external support. From a parking lot 3 blocks away. He had good signal from there." She looked at him. 12 people, Mr. Brooks." "It wasn't simultaneous," he said. "That's the part that sounds more dramatic than it was. It was sequential, with patience and appropriate timing." He paused. "Also, their internal communication was poor. They'd gotten comfortable." Reyes made a note. "We're going to need you available for the grand jury, probably within 60 days. "I'll be available." "And the 2 individuals you restrained in the tunnel, zip-tied with their own restraints and left breathing," Nathan said. "I checked their airways before I left." She almost made the expression again, the one that wasn't quite a smile. "Of course you did." She closed her folder. "One more question, off the record." "Okay." "Why didn't you call us from the tunnel?" He thought about it honestly, because it was an honest question, and she deserved a real answer. "Because I didn't know who inside Bennett Dynamics was involved," he said. "I didn't know if it was one person or several. I didn't know if the police response would be clean or if it would get back to someone who would move her before you found her." He looked at Reyes steadily. "And I didn't have time to sort that out. Every minute I spent making calls was a minute she was further away." Reyes nodded slowly. "That's a reasonable answer." "It's the true one," he said. "Whether it's reasonable, I'm honestly still deciding." He left the statement room at 8:47 and found Marcus in the lobby, which was unexpected. Marcus had driven in from wherever he'd been parked when the operation concluded, apparently deciding that a situation this size warranted a physical presence. He was 51, heavy-set in a way that was mostly still solid, with a graying beard he'd started growing after he left the service and never shaved off. He was holding 2 cups of coffee, and he handed one to Nathan without comment. They stood together near the lobby windows and looked at the street. You could have called me earlier, Marcus said, when you first saw the van. You were asleep. I'm always asleep. You still could have called. I know, Nathan said. Marcus drank his coffee. 3 external nodes shut down completely. The VPN chains are traced back to a hosting operation in Eastern Europe that the Bureau has had on a watch list for 2 years. This gives them enough to move on it. The data that was exfiltrated before Whitfield cut the access is recoverable, apparently. Something about the transfer not completing means the files are corrupted on the receiving end. He paused. Not that I fully understand that. Whitfield explained it to me for about 4 minutes, and I understood the first 30 seconds. The important part is it didn't complete. The important part is it didn't complete, Marcus agreed. He looked at Nathan sideways. How's the knee? It'll be fine. You said that in Kandahar and you limped for 3 weeks. It'll be fine in about 3 weeks, Nathan said. Marcus made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, the kind of silence that accumulates between people who have known each other long enough that they don't need to fill it. Outside, the city was fully awake now. Cabs and pedestrians and the specific mid-morning energy of a Manhattan weekday in motion, entirely indifferent to the events that had shaped the last 9 hours in the building above it. She's going to offer you something, Marcus said. Probably. You going to take it? Nathan thought about it. I don't know yet. Marcus nodded. He didn't push. That was one of the things Nathan had always valued about him. He understood the difference between questions that needed immediate answers and ones that didn't. Maya know you were out all night? Marcus asked. Mrs. Pacheco told her I had an extra shift. She accepted that. Nathan paused. She'll ask questions when I get home. She always asks questions. Smart kid. Her mother's daughter, Nathan said. He went home at 10:15. Maya was at school, which he'd confirmed with Mrs. Pacheco before leaving the building. The house on Kellner Street was quiet in the particular mid-morning way, the specific domestic silence of a space that was lived in but temporarily empty, breakfast dishes in the drying rack, a drawing Maya had left on the kitchen table that appeared to be a horse but might have been a dog. He was never entirely sure. He stood in the kitchen for a moment and let the silence settle around him. He showered. He changed. He sat on the edge of his bed with his elbows on his knees and looked at the floor and breathed. There was a specific thing that happened after operations. Not every time and not in any dramatic way, but a kind of delayed arrival of the weight of what you'd done. The way the body kept moving while something else in you took longer to catch up. He'd felt it after real operations years ago, lying in a bunk in places he couldn't name, staring at the ceiling. He felt a quieter version of it now, in his own bedroom, with the drawing of the probably horse on the kitchen table and Mrs. Pacheco's coffee cup rinsed and upside down in the drying rack. He thought about the man in the tunnel who'd looked at his face in a flashlight beam and decided he was nobody. He thought about Victor saying, I told you about the driver and the gray-haired man, Harlan, dismissing it, and how that dismissal had cost them everything. He thought about Olivia in the warehouse chair, working her zip tie loose in millimeter increments while she negotiated the terms of a phone call she never intended to make. He thought about Derek Sullivan in the stairwell, saying the vulnerabilities are still real, which was true, which didn't excuse anything, which also wasn't nothing. He lay down on top of the covers and set his alarm for 2 hours before school pickup and closed his eyes, and he was asleep in approximately 4 minutes, which was another thing that had never fully left him from the service. The ability to sleep when sleep was available, without ceremony or wind down, because you had learned that the time between available and unavailable could be very short. He dreamed about Rachel once, briefly, in the scattered, non-linear way of the genuinely tired. She was standing in the kitchen making coffee, and she looked at him over her shoulder and said something he couldn't hear, and he woke up before he could ask her to repeat it. The room was bright. His alarm had 11 minutes left on it. He lay there for those 11 minutes and thought about nothing in particular, and then he got up and went to get his daughter. But Maya had lost a tooth the previous Thursday and was still adjusting to the gap in her mouth with her tongue at unpredictable intervals, which meant she talked about it roughly every 12 minutes. She did this during the walk home, the preparation of after-school snacks, and the first 20 minutes of homework time, at which point she exhausted the topic and switched without transition to a detailed account of a conflict between two of her classmates that had apparently been building since Tuesday. Nathan sat across the kitchen table from her and listened to all of it with the full attention that it deserved, which was genuine rather than performed, because Maya had always had the ability to make the small mechanics of her day feel like things that mattered. Not because she demanded that they matter, but because she inhabited them with a completeness that made them real. At some point during the account of the Tuesday conflict, she looked up at him and said, "You look tired." "I am a little tired." "Did something happen at work?" He thought about the tunnel, the warehouse, the stairwell, Harlan's pale eyes in the emergency lighting, Agent Reyes's almost smile. "I had a long night," he said. "Everything's okay." She studied him in the frank, unself-conscious way of 8-year-olds, the look that didn't know yet to dress itself up as something more socially comfortable. "Is the person you were driving okay?" He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "She's okay." Maya seemed to accept this. She went back to her homework. After a moment, she said, without looking up, "Mrs. Pacheco said you were brave." "Mrs. Pacheco doesn't know what happened." "She said you were probably brave anyway." Maya turned a page in her notebook. "She said you usually are." Nathan looked at his daughter bent over her homework, her hair pulled back in the uneven ponytail she'd done herself that morning because she'd decided 2 months ago that she was old enough to do it herself. And something moved through him that he didn't try to name because naming it would make it smaller than it was. "Finish your math," he said. "I'm almost done," she said, in the tone of someone who was not almost done. He got up and started making dinner. Olivia called 4 days later. He was in the parking lot of Maya's school, 20 minutes early as usual, watching a maintenance crew replace the chain link section at the back of the playground that had been bent since September. His phone showed her name. She'd texted the day after the board meeting to ask if she could call when he was available, and he'd said yes and then gone 3 days without hearing from her, which he'd assumed meant the week had swallowed her whole, which seemed correct. "Nathan," she said when he answered. Her voice had recovered something. Not that it had been lost, but there was a quality to it that was different from the warehouse, less compressed, like a person who had been holding a particular muscle tense for several days and had finally let it relax. "How are things?" he asked. "Complicated," she said, "but moving in the right direction." A pause. "Derek entered a plea agreement yesterday. He's cooperating fully with the federal investigation in exchange for reduced sentencing recommendations. Harlan's legal team has been on the phone with the Bureau since Thursday. Victor Kane is not cooperating, which is apparently very consistent with his personality type." "That sounds right," Nathan said. The board met again on Monday. Formally, we withdrew Sullivan's resolution and passed a new one authorizing the full security infrastructure investment he'd recommended 18 months ago. Her voice had something dry in it. $42 million. The same amount they declined before. She paused. "I presented it personally. Nobody objected." "Good." The data that was partially exfiltrated, Whitfield confirmed it was corrupted on receipt. The core architecture files were never accessed. The biometric authentication wall held. Another pause. Which means the 6 years of work that went into that system are intact. "That's the part that mattered most," Nathan said. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what to say to you. I've been trying to figure out what the right thing to offer is, and every time I write something down it sounds either inadequate or excessive, so I'm just going to say it plainly. Okay. I want to offer you a position. Director of Executive Security, reporting directly to me, with full authority to restructure the department from the ground up. The compensation is, it's significant. I'll send you the offer letter if you want to see the specifics, but the number is going to surprise you." He watched the maintenance crew work on the fence. One of them was having trouble with a post that wasn't sitting level in its concrete footing, and the other was holding it steady while the first man made adjustments. "I appreciate that," Nathan said. "I hear a but in there." "It's not a but exactly." He thought about how to say it accurately. "The position you're describing, the scope of it, the travel, the hours, the level of engagement it would need, I've done versions of that work. I know what it takes, and what it takes is the kind of availability that I don't have right now and don't want to have. Because of your daughter. Because of my daughter, he said, and because I made a decision 8 years ago about what my life was going to look like, and I've been pretty deliberate about keeping that decision. Last week it was a different context. The situation was what it was, but I can't make that situation my daily life again. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone accepting a rejection, but the silence of someone thinking. What if the position was different, she said. Tell me what you mean. I mean, what if the title and scope were restructured so that you had genuine flexibility? Not a courtesy title with inflexible demands underneath it. I mean real flexibility. School schedules, pickup times, no travel without significant advance notice. Advisory rather than operational. You'd consult on security strategy, review my travel protocols, assess threat environments when they arise. The kind of thing you could do in 15 hours a week if the weeks were ordinary, more if they weren't. She paused. And on the nights when they're very much not ordinary, I'd want to know that you were available. He leaned back in the driver's seat and looked at the school building. That's a different conversation than the first one you were having. I know, she said. I had 4 days to think about it. What would you call it? I don't know. Chief Security Advisor. We can figure out the title. The title matters less than the terms. Another pause. Nathan, I'm not trying to buy back what happened. I know that's not something you can put a price on. What I'm trying to do is find a way to work with someone I trust in a way that actually works for his life. She stopped. Am I making sense? You're making sense, he said. Okay. I need to think about it. Take whatever time you need. I'll call you this week, he said. Probably Thursday. Thursday is fine. A brief pause. How's your knee? He almost laughed. How do you know about my knee? Marcus Webb is surprisingly forthcoming when you ask him the right questions, she said. There was something in her voice. The first genuinely light thing he'd heard from her, an almost warmth that wasn't performed. He also told me you drove because it let you be home for school pickup, which is, I don't know. I've been thinking about that too. Don't build a mythology around it, Nathan said. It was a practical decision. Most of the best decisions are, she said. They said goodbye and he sat in the parking lot for another 12 minutes until the school doors opened and children began to spill out onto the front steps in the specific organized chaos of 3:15 on a weekday. And then he saw Maya's red backpack and her uneven ponytail and the small, quick way she moved when she spotted his car. Not running exactly, but faster than walking, the gait of someone who was glad to see the thing they were moving toward. He got out of the car. He called Olivia on Thursday, as he'd said he would. He'd spent the intervening days doing what he normally did, driving, school drop-off, dinner, homework, the ordinary percussion of a life organized around a small person's needs. He'd gone to see the physical therapist about his knee on Wednesday, who told him what he already knew, which was that he needed to rest it and would not rest it, and that the long-term prognosis was reasonable if he was more careful, none of which he disputed. He'd thought about the offer, not constantly. He didn't have the bandwidth for constant in his current life, which was part of the point, but in the edges of things, the way you turned a question over while driving or doing dishes or lying in bed before sleep. What he kept coming back to was not the compensation or the title or even the flexibility, but the thing Olivia had said. I'm trying to find a way to work with someone I trust, in a way that actually works for his life. It was a straightforward thing to say. It was also the kind of thing that required a certain honesty to say, the willingness to acknowledge what you needed rather than dress it up as something more transactional. He'd spent 8 years doing work that was good and safe and entirely undemanding of the part of him that had once been very good at a specific and difficult thing. And most of the time that was fine. Most of the time it was the right choice, and he didn't second-guess it. But he'd also spent that night moving through a building in the dark with information and patience and the specific quality of attention he'd spent years developing. And at the end of it, a woman was not dead, and a company's infrastructure was not destroyed. and 12 people who had organized something cold and elaborate and well-funded had been brought to a stopping point by one man who had been underestimated so thoroughly and so completely that they'd handed him the conditions of his own success. He wasn't sure what to do with that. He wasn't sure it needed to be done with anything. But he was also honest enough with himself to acknowledge that there was a version of his life that could hold both things: the school pickup and the advisory role, the quiet breakfast and the threat assessment, if the structure was right and the terms were real. He called her on Thursday at 2:15, between a corporate transport job and school pickup. "I'll take the advisory role," he said, "on the terms you described. I want them in writing, specifically the flexibility, the advance notice on travel, the school schedule provisions. If anything in the written offer contradicts what you told me on the phone, I'll send it back." "That's fair," she said. "I'll have legal draft it today. And I want the ability to say no to specific engagements without it affecting the broader arrangement. Also fair. And I want to bring Marcus Webb in as a consultant on the infrastructure side. He's better at the network threat assessment piece than I am, and you need someone who can speak both languages." A pause. "I'd have to meet him." "He's difficult to categorize," Nathan said, "but he's the best I've ever worked with." "Set up a meeting," she said. "I'll be the judge." "He'll appreciate that," Nathan said. "He likes being judged by people who are actually paying attention." There was a brief silence, and then Olivia said, with the dry, near warmth he was beginning to recognize as her particular version of humor, "Is that a compliment?" "It is," he said. "In his vocabulary and mine, it's a significant one." Chat. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday evening in early November, Olivia Bennett stood on the rooftop terrace of the Bennett Dynamics building and watched the city below her do what cities did at that hour: shift from the amber of late afternoon into the early blue of coming dark, the windows of the buildings opposite lighting up floor by floor as the workday ended and the evening began. That particular Manhattan alchemy of 10 million individual lives running their separate courses in the same dense vertical space. Nathan stood beside her, not quite at the railing. His knee was better mostly. He'd been in the building twice in the past 3 weeks. Once for a formal security review with Whitfield and the reconstituted security team, once for a threat assessment presentation to the board that had gone 40 minutes over schedule because Carver had asked good questions and Nathan had answered them directly, which Carver had apparently not expected and responded to by asking more. Olivia had called the rooftop meeting. She'd said she wanted to review the physical security assessment for the building's exterior access points, which was a real thing that needed reviewing. She'd also said she thought the view was better at this hour than in any formal meeting room, which Nathan suspected was the more honest reason. She had a folder in her hand that she hadn't opened yet. "The Mercer acquisition closed yesterday," she said. "I saw," Nathan said. "Congratulations." "It was supposed to close 3 weeks ago, on the night of the convoy." She looked at the city. "I keep thinking about that. How differently everything could have gone. How many moving pieces there were. And how most of them were things I had no control over." A pause. "I'm not someone who spends a lot of time on hypotheticals. It's not a productive use of attention, but I've been thinking about this one." "And?" "And I keep arriving at the same place," she said, "which is that the thing that made the difference was something I couldn't have planned for and wouldn't have thought to plan for. A driver I didn't know who was paying attention to mirrors." She said it without drama, just as a fact. "I built this company on the assumption that the right systems and the right people in the right positions create the outcomes you want. That rigorous planning closes the gaps." She paused. "And I still believe that. I just believe it with a qualification now that I didn't have before." "What's the qualification?" She thought about it. "That the thing which saves you is almost never the thing you built to save you," she said. "It's the thing you overlooked, the person you underestimated, the variable you couldn't account for because it didn't fit the model." She finally looked at him. "I had 47 security personnel on my payroll the night of the convoy. None of them were you." "Some of them were good," Nathan said. "Some of them were very good," she agreed. "And none of that was what mattered." He thought about what to say to that and decided the honest answer was simpler than anything he could construct. "The thing you're describing," he said, The overlooked variable. It's not actually a comfort for most people. It means the gap between what you plan for and what actually happens is always going to exist. You can close it, but you can't eliminate it. I know, she said. But it means something, that a person can stand in that gap. She paused. That's not nothing. No, he said, it's not nothing. The city spread out below them, block after block of lit windows and moving traffic, and the tiny, indistinct motion of people going about the specific particular details of their lives, all of it running at a scale that made individual human beings look small and made individual human decisions look smaller. And yet those decisions were the mechanism of everything. The driver who paid attention, the woman who worked a zip tie loose in millimeter increments, the man who chose a stairwell over a door because something in him was not quite done choosing. I owe you an apology, Olivia said. Nathan looked at her. In the back seat, before the tunnel. I asked you about your military background, and then I went back to my phone. She said it plainly, without dressing it up. You'd already told me something was wrong. You'd radioed Garrett about the van. I heard all of that and I went back to my acquisition call. She looked at the city. You were showing me what you were, the kind of attention you were paying, and I processed it as interesting background information instead of what it actually was. You couldn't have known what was coming, Nathan said. No, but I could have paid better attention to the person in the front seat. She paused. I've spent a long time building expertise in reading balance sheets and market positions and organizational structures. I'm less good at reading people. I knew that about myself. I just didn't know how much it mattered until that night. She looked at him. I'm working on it. For what it's worth, Nathan said, you read the warehouse pretty well. You were working that zip tie before I was inside. I had time to think while they drove me there, she said. It's easier to pay attention when the only thing in the room that matters is the room. That's the trick, Nathan said, making that true before you're in the room. She looked at him for a moment. Not the assessing look from the car, not the focused look from the warehouse, something quieter than either of those. Is that something you can teach? Some of it, he said. The rest of it you learn by accumulation, time, repetition, the specific education of being wrong often enough that you start to recognize what wrong feels like before it's finished happening. That sounds uncomfortable. It is, he said. It's also useful. She almost smiled. It was a small expression, the kind that arrived and departed quickly, as though it hadn't fully decided to stay. And it changed her face in a way that was briefly and entirely human. The face of someone who was genuinely tired and genuinely intact, and was standing on a rooftop in November looking at a city that had not, despite several people's best efforts, managed to take her company from her. She opened the folder finally. Building schematics, access point assessments, the preliminary security review Nathan had submitted Monday. She held it at an angle so both of them could see it in the fading light. The northeast stairwell, she said. Security camera has a 14-degree blind spot, Nathan said. It's been that way in the original installation. The contractor who built the system should have caught it. What do we do about it? Two options. Reposition the camera, that's the clean solution. Or add a second camera at the opposite corner with overlapping coverage. That's more redundant and more expensive, but gives you a backup if one fails. Do both, she said. That's what I'd recommend, he said. She made a note. They went through the rest of the document in the order it was organized, point by point, practical and specific. The work of making a building safer than it had been the week before by the accumulation of small corrections. It was not dramatic work. It was the opposite of dramatic work. It was the careful, unglamorous business of closing gaps, the kind of work that only mattered when it didn't have to be used. Nathan understood that kind of work better than any other kind. The light finished changing, the last blue of dusk giving way to the full dark of a November evening over Manhattan, and the city below them settled into its nighttime version. Brighter at street level, quieter at altitude, the particular hum of 10 million people shifting from the day's concerns to the evenings. Somewhere on the west side, school had been out for 3 hours, and Maya was at Mrs. Pacheco's having dinner, as she was on the Tuesdays when Nathan had evening commitments. And she had texted him at 5:47 to tell him that Mrs. Pacheco had made arroz con pollo, which she had decided was her new favorite food, And he had written back a thumbs up and then looked at it and added a smiley face, which was not usually his practice but felt right in the moment. He thought about Rachel, briefly, again. He did this less than he used to and more than people probably expected. Not grief exactly, not anymore. More like the way you carried a person with you after they were gone. The way their absence became a presence of its own. The shape of a life you continued to live partly in their direction. He thought she would have something to say about all of this. He thought she would have been right about whatever she said. He folded his copy of the security review and put it in his jacket pocket. "I should go," he said. "School pickup covered tonight, but I like to be back before she goes to sleep." "Of course," Olivia said. She closed the folder. "Nathan?" "Yeah." She looked at him with the straightforward directness that was, he'd come to understand, simply how she was. Not performed, not strategic, just her actual way of moving through the world when she wasn't being careful about it. "Thank you," she said. "Not for the job or the advisory role or any of the formal parts of this, just for that night. For what you decided to do in the tunnel when you could have decided differently." He thought about the tunnel, the 2 guards, the math, the decision that had already been made before he made it. "You would have gotten out," he said. "You were working the zip tie before I got there." "Eventually," she said. "Maybe. But eventually covers a lot of ground." She paused. "You didn't have to come in after me. You had every reason not to. You had a daughter at home and a job you'd held for 8 months that you'd chosen specifically because it was quiet." She stopped. "Why did you?" He thought about it honestly, because she was asking honestly, and because the question was real. "Because the situation was what it was," he said, "and I was the person in it." He paused. "That's the only reason I've ever had, for anything like that. The situation is what it is, and you're either the person who acts or the person who doesn't, and I've only ever known how to be one of those." She looked at him for a moment. Then she nodded once, not the nod of someone satisfied with an answer, but the nod of someone who recognized a truth when they heard one and was filing it somewhere real. "Good night, Nathan," she said. "Good night," he said. He took the elevator down. The lobby was quiet at this hour, the day staff gone, the overnight security team just coming on. The guard at the front desk nodded at him as he passed. He'd been in the building twice now, and people who paid attention had started to recognize him, which was a small thing and meant something. Outside, the November air was cold and clear, the kind of cold that made the city feel sharp at its edges, the buildings more distinct, the lights more particular. He buttoned his jacket and walked toward the parking structure where he'd left his car, passing the ordinary motion of the evening. A delivery cyclist, a couple arguing quietly outside a restaurant, a man walking a dog who stopped to sniff at something invisible in the gutter with the complete absorption of a creature for whom the present moment was the only moment. Nathan watched the dog for a second, genuinely, because there was something about that kind of total attention to the immediate that he'd always found interesting. The way an animal's awareness was unself-conscious in a way human awareness almost never was, unburdened by the past that produced it or the future it was moving toward. He kept walking. In the parking structure, he sat in his car for a moment before starting it. The cut on his forearm was fully healed. The knee was 70%, which was his body's honest position on 70%. He was tired in the accumulated way of the last 3 weeks. Not the specific exhaustion of a single long night, but the broader tiredness of a life lived at a pitch you'd chosen deliberately, even when it was demanding. He thought about what Olivia had asked him on the rooftop. "Why did you?" And the answer he'd given, which was true, and also incomplete the way most true answers were. The fuller version, the one he hadn't said because it was too long and the evening was over, was something like this: that he had walked away from a specific kind of life 8 years ago, not because that life had nothing to offer, but because something else needed him more, and he had given himself to that something else completely, and it had been the right choice and would always be the right choice. But the self you build over 8 years of being one thing doesn't erase the self that came before it. It accumulates on top of it, becomes part of the same structure. A life built in layers, the way all lives were. Each version of yourself present in the version you became. He was a father. He was a driver. He was a man who had once done very specific things in very specific rooms and who carried the residue of that in the way he watched mirrors and calculated distances and felt the geometry of dangerous situations before his conscious mind fully engaged. He was not any one of those things. He was all of them, imperfectly, on different days and different measures, and the imperfection was not the failure of the life. It was the texture of it, the proof that it had been lived by an actual person rather than a simplified version of one. He started the car. Kellner Street was 20 minutes away. Maya would be finishing dinner, telling Mrs. Pacheco something elaborate and specific about something that had happened at school that he would get the second installment of when he arrived. The house would smell like arroz con pollo, and the drawing of the possibly horse would still be on the kitchen table, and the drying rack would have the morning's dishes in it, and everything would be exactly as ordinary as it was, which was the only extraordinary thing he had ever actually wanted. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the street and drove north through the city with the radio off, listening to the sound of the road, watching the mirrors out of habit, paying attention to the ordinary traffic the way a person paid attention to things when paying attention was simply what they did. Not because danger was present, not because anything was wrong, just because the world was full of information and some people were built to receive it. The city moved around him, indifferent and enormous and alive, and Nathan Brooks drove home.